Hey, Chris Howard here once again, and welcome back to beautiful Bali, Ubud Bali, the Indonesian rainforest jungle paradise. I love to say that way. Let's see, I've got a question here, and I've got to find it once again because it was there. There it is. And the question is, where did it go? Here we go. I have a certain person in my family that really pushes my buttons, and it doesn't take long after seeing them for me to get defensive and closed off. I want us to be able to communicate, but it seems impossible sometimes. What do you suggest to help this relationship? Okay, I'm gonna approach the question from this perspective, because you said that this person in your family really pushes your buttons, and it doesn't take you long to get defensive and close off. And I think the basic underlying structure of what you're saying is that somebody else is responsible for the way you feel about anything, right? Ultimately, the question is, who's driving the bus? You're driving the bus. You're in charge of your states of mind and emotion. And I know a lot of people don't, most of the people in the world don't look at it that way. They think that their states of mind and emotion are determined by the weather, determined by, the economy, the economic times. Is, the things up? Is it down? What's happening outside of them? And none of those things are responsible for your emotional state. Ultimately, it's you. If your emotions are hinged on externals, then you're in for an emotional roller coaster ride of a life, right? The only way to take charge of your experience of life and make sure that you're having the grandest expression of a life possible is to take charge of your own emotions, is to take responsibility for your own emotions. And there's lots of different techniques that we teach throughout the trainings that we have at Rock House for taking charge of your emotional states. One very simple technique would be an anchoring technique. You've heard of anchoring before, based on Pavlov's work. When Ivan Pavlov would feed his dogs, he'd sound a tuning fork simultaneously. Wasn't actually a bell, but he'd sound that tuning fork and the dogs would salivate. They'd be in this intense emotional state. And so pretty soon he'd sound that tuning fork every time. And because they were, and here's the keys, this is what I want you to remember from this. Because the dogs were in an intense, the word's intense, emotional state, and simultaneously there was a unique stimulus, the two became neurologically linked, became linked in the dog's nervous system. So pretty soon all he had to do was sound the tuning fork and the dogs would salivate. So am I saying that you're going to sound a tuning fork and your family member is going to start salivating? No, this is about you and this is about your state. So the question is, what are some triggers, right? In the case of the dogs, the trigger was the tuning fork. What are some triggers that you can set for yourself that will cause you to remember intense states that are more empowering states for you? What's a state that you want to be in relationship to this family member? Is it a state of compassion? Perhaps, is it a state of understanding? And I don't know what it is. It's like, it's going to be different depending upon the situation, the individual. So you're the one that has to decide these things. But what are the states that you really want to bring into that situation? I think that most people go through life getting whatever they get emotionally. And they're at the whim of everything else that happens to them, right? Now, what I'm suggesting is rather than do that, you go into situations by design, that you go into these situations and you think, okay, what are the emotional states that I'm going to bring into this situation? Now, one thing to remember is that when you're in any given situation, in interpersonal communication, the person who's most committed to their state will end up drawing the other person into that state. So if this family member is more committed to whatever emotional state they're in, whether it be, and I don't know what they're doing to push your buttons, so you say, but maybe they're irritated or they're agitated in some way. Well, if they're more committed to that than you are to the states that you're going to go in with, like a state of compassion or a state of love, if they're more committed to their state, they're going to pull you in. Right? If you're committed more to your state, on the other hand, you're going to pull them in, right? So that's the key, is first deciding what emotional states do you want to be in when you go into that situation. Write down 3 or 4 different empowering states. And then when I say come up with some triggers that can trigger those states off, maybe what you want to do is just recondition the old triggers. That's a good way to go. So you can do this through visual guided imagery, right? Now, it's a complex process. We teach all sorts of different ways to do this. I'm going to give you the down and dirty quick way to reprogram or recondition those anchors that you have that fire off. So one way would be, first of all, we need to collect those emotional states. So whatever emotional states you write down, so let's say it's compassion, it's love, and it's understanding. Then I want you to write down 3 or 4 events in your past for each one of those where you felt those emotional states. So write down 3 or 4 events from your past for each one of those where you felt those emotional states. Step 1, identify the states. Step 2, write down 3 or 4 events from your past where you felt those states. Step 3, go back into those incidents. Like in your mind, it's a journey of consciousness, but all of your problems are problems of imagination, and all of your solutions are solutions of imagination, right? So you're going to go back and you're going to step into your body, so you're right inside those events. So you're looking through your own eyes, hearing what you heard at the time, and feeling those feelings. And you're going to collect those states, and you're going to begin to practice feeling those states. We have a technique that's called stacking that we teach also in some of our trainings, where you can go back and you can stack one of those states on top of another, so you could be feeling 3 or 4 of those states. So you could be feeling compassionate and loving at the same time, and you're feeling you're feeling healthily detached. Might be a good state to bring in there too, right? So where you're feeling all of those things, right? So you can stack those. The way that you do it is you feel one state, you go into another event with another state, and then you just imagine stacking that state on top of the first one. And then you can do the same thing with the third one, and you'll get better at layering these states like that. Once you've done all of that, then you can come back to the here and now, and then just do guided imagery and do visual rehearsal. Imagine yourself going into situations with this person where they do whatever they did that fired off those, that pushed those buttons, right? Where they did whatever they did, but instead imagine going into those situations with these emotional states, and notice how easy it is and how it flows and how you go through it. And the world around us is nothing but a projection of our consciousness. It's been said that people in our lives can't behave in any way in relationship with us other than the way we project them to behave. Dr. Phil says we teach people how to treat us, right? So the way that you show up absolutely can and will change the behaviors of the people around you. You just got to be committed to it and go into it. So create it with design. And remember, if you need any help with anything that's going on, always feel free to reach out to our support at rockhouseglobal.com. And until next time, love deeply, shine brightly, make every day an extraordinary adventure.